All right, Lisa, let's go ahead and get started.
All right, thanks everybody for joining us. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what we've learned from doing automated metadata extraction with some more sophisticated document types, and specific some what we call engineering documentation for some of our oil and gas clients. Before I get started, just a quick run of intros. I'm Lisa. I run our technology strategy. Gary, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, I'm Gary Cox. I'm a technical architect here.
All right, and then we're also joined by Dan Champ with Effisoft. Dan, you want to say hello?
Hey everyone, nice to meet you. Dan Champ over here from Effisoft. I run channel marketing and a whole bunch of other things around here.
All right, so we have 30 minutes set aside today, and we are going to go fast because there's a lot of content we're trying to get in 30 minutes. I'm actually going to start with just one slide to kind of ground us in the same set of language, but we're going to spend most of our day today actually looking at some real technology. So to level set though, as we get started, what do we mean by automated metadata extraction? I'm going to pop down here to my next slide. Sometimes you might hear this referred to, the language changes year to year. One of the phrases we use is intelligent document processing. And really, what is that process? So this is what I would call the act of taking information and pulling it out of your documents. And I'd like to think of it the same way you might train an actual person that lived in your office. If you had a whole set of papers that sat on their desk, how would you train that person to be able to tell what it was they were looking at and what's the important information that gets pulled out of it? And we break that down into this process that you see in front of you. So the very first step in the process is capture. This is really how documents come into the system. And so documents might enter your organization in lots of different ways. It may be they get mailed in and someone scans them. Maybe they come in electronically. Maybe they get dumped onto a file share somewhere. There's lots of different ways that documents come into an organization. And then we need to do some stuff with them. So the first step in the process we call image processing. And this is actually where you take that kind of virtual stack of documents and you break those up into their composite parts, do that page separation. Maybe if they are twisted when they were scanned, maybe do that straightening of the image, cleaning up if there's some noise on it. Do the reading of that document. You've heard things like OCR, ICR, optical character recognition, to actually take that just image that you have that you start with and actually turn that into a set of actual words. And then the next step in the process we call classification. So again, back to my analogy where I have that person that's sitting in your office taking that whole stack of papers. They need to separate and say, what is it that I'm looking at? This is an invoice that I'm looking at. This is a PO that I'm looking at. You'll often hear us talk about kind of those simple documents that people can relate to, right? So in today, we're going to be looking at much more interesting document types than that. We're going to be looking at directional surveys and certification reports and log records and things like that. But that's saying, what is it the kind of document that I'm looking at? And then once you know what it is, we need to take what is the relevant information we need to extract from that document. So on an invoice, that might be the account number, it might be the total, the amount that's due. When we're talking about the documents we're going to look at today, that might be a well name or an API number. But depending on what kind of document that is, what is the relevant information that we want to pull out and extract from it? And then this is where we could start to get into a little bit technology specific. So when Bluefish works on these sorts of projects, the technology that we like to use is one called Effisoft Transact. And Effisoft actually works on a basis of what we will call exception-based processing. So while I gave you a little analogy of a person that's sitting sitting at her desk and she is going and looking at every document and manually entering all this information into some sort of a system, we're going to use the computer to do all this work for us. But sometimes especially in the case of really sophisticated documents like the kind that y'all on this call today have to deal with, where the system isn't completely 100% confident in what it's looking at, right? There is a confidence threshold. And so we are going to, you'll see today as we start to look at the system, we're going to have the system is going to show us those exceptions that it's not sure about, and then a human being can validate those exceptions and make sure that any of that information is captured properly. And then the last step in the process is for us to actually deliver this information out to the appropriate business system. And so there can be lots of different systems this looks like. Some of our clients are using a content management system that goes into, some of them are using a more specific document system that's specifically tailored for engineering documents. Like we have a client that we're working with right now that has a targeted meridian for these documents. It might be lots of different things that the information gets exported out to. But the point is that as we are taking what we are doing in this and what we're going to focus on in our demo today is we're in that process of taking the information out of these documents and releasing it into the appropriate system so you can kind of feed your downstream processes. And so this is what we're going to focus on today, this automated metadata extraction. And so given this context, I'm actually going to flip over to a demo where I'm actually going to show you the process of doing these various steps in FSoft Transact. So I'm going to flip over here, and I've actually already logged into the system. One of the things that's really cool about FSoft is it's a 100% thin client architecture. So I'm going to be showing you everything today that an operator would experience, someone who's working with these documents. In a little bit, I'm going to hand it over to Gary, and he's actually going to show you what the administrative side of this looks like. So we're actually not looking at vaporware here today. We're actually going to show you how some things are really built. So I'm going to pop into view my batches, and batches is just like a stack of documents, and they've just been broken up into different stacks of paper, if you will. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to pop into one of these sample batches that I can use to orient us a little bit to the system. So this is, if I pop back over to the process, we're looking at the results right now of this classification step. So I started out with a whole stack of papers, and the system has separated these out into the different documents and said, what kind of document are they? And so if I'm going to look, we're going to spend quite a bit of time with these documents today. So I'll actually start at the top and work through and just show you what we're looking at. So this first document here, you can see down the left-hand side, each one of these is a different document. In the center, we can see a little snapshot of all the pages. And the right-hand side, I just see an image of what it is. So this is what we're calling, for purposes of this demo, a certification. It's just a certification of the survey. I actually have a few directional surveys in here. Here's one. It's a multi-page document. Here's another one. There's an L1. I've got a log file. I got a P4 here. And then we have a plat. And you can see these documents all look completely different. Maybe a lot of the L1s are going to look similar, but a lot of these documents might look totally different. Like the directional survey from one company would look totally different from the directional survey from another, while they all are going to have like pages and pages of spreadsheets and numbers, right? So this kind of pattern of these three columns is going to look similar to kind of as we go through here. But I want to point out that behind the scenes, what FSoft has actually done is done all this work to say, do the slicing and dicing of where one document starts and one document ends, as well as told us what kind of document is. And notice there's a green bar here on the left. Those that it had very high confidence on, it didn't even want me to look at. And if you recall, when I first opened the screen, it actually popped us all the way down to this document. This was the first document it maybe didn't have as high of a confidence as we had told the system it needed to have in order to proceed. Now, I want to be perfectly honest with you, in a lot of systems, a lot of batches will go through and completely skip this step because it actually will have really great results for here, but it makes a really lousy demo. So we typically put that confidence threshold pretty high so that we can actually stop and look at some of these documents. So this is that first step in the process, this looking at the results of the classification. But where it gets really interesting is when we start to look at automatically pulling the information out of those documents, that extraction phase. So I'm actually going to pop back to my list of batches. And instead of looking at things that are in this review stage, I'm going to flip over and look in the validation stage. And I've got another one, and I just teed these up ahead of the start of the webinar today to save us a little bit of time. But as I pop into this batch, it's got the same documents in, it's just a copy of that batch that we did before. But you can see that it just popped down to the third document here, because this is the first one that it didn't have the highest confidence in. But the middle section now, instead of showing me an image of each of those thumbnails and allowing me to manipulate maybe the page order or where documents were separated, it is now actually showing me the metadata that has been automatically extracted from this document. So if I were to click here, you can see that as I click around in here, the latitude, you can see that it was pulled from here. Here's where the longitude was pulled. Here's where the county was pulled. The well name and the survey date. And for some reason, these have a lower confidence than the threshold. And so these are red. And what's just asking me as an operator to just take a second look at those and double check it. Now, a couple of other little interesting things I want to point out, even on this specific document that we're looking at. You can see that the date is actually being displayed here as 02/03/21, even though the actual date listed in the document is February 3rd. So there's some ability to do some date normalization. So remember, all of this information is going to be released into your downstream systems. So that normalization of things can be really important. So there's lots of hooks in FSOF to allow us to be able to do some of that normalization in here. Date's a really common one, but you could do the same thing for like a list of counties. Maybe you can normalize against the list of counties. We could do a database lookup for a specific list of well names. There could be other things that you might add into your your specific configuration of the system in order to provide even higher confidence results. Let me pop around and show you just a couple of different documents in here, because we're pulling different information sometimes for different types of documents. So let's look at that certification again. This is really interesting because in this case, we're automatically pulling information that was really in more of like paragraph form, right? So instead of being a form before, we were looking at, and I'll just pop on a different directional survey where maybe there was a key that we were looking for, like the date, and we were pulling the value associated with it. Here, it is free form within text. So there's some different ways we're doing that extraction, and Gary will talk more about these sorts of things as we go later. But I'll show you, as we're pulling all this information, I love that you can just kind of see exactly where it's highlighted. You also have the ability, if there was something that wasn't in here, we can actually click within the UI. Let's keep going, and maybe I'll have an example where we're missing some information. I can fill something in. We took a look at this one. Here's just another directional survey. Here's a form L1. Again, maybe didn't have quite the confidence we had on the API number, so it's showing us in that one. Some more lat longe, a well number, even pulling it when it's reversed, when we have the text white on black. Sometimes that can be a little bit tricky, but we're able to pull that information. Here's another document, some great results. And we can even get it, take a look at this plat, like where it's actually even really hard for us to see. I can actually zoom in here if you want to like see some of the details, but we're able to find this information wherever it is on the page. So it doesn't have to be like up in the header, but really it's wherever we're finding it, anywhere in the document. We're truly looking anywhere in the system. So let's say that I wanted to, the Andrews wasn't correct and it's really scientific, it's the correct county. Notice that I'm just clicking directly on here and it actually is pulling that. So when you talk about an operator wanting to quickly get through information, they have that ability to interact with the system in a really quick way. And then one more magical thing I want to show you on this, because I know I'm talking longer than Gary wants me to. I want to take a look at some of the what we call tabular data. So it's not just this header information that can actually be extracted, but we can actually pull the information from these tables as well. So if I click on here on the table, you can see that I'm actually automatically extracting all of this information that's in here. And it doesn't even have to just be from the same page. If I were to skip down in here, I'm just going to click on a field. It's going to take me, it's pulling, you can see all the way from page 3. So it seamlessly is able to extract this information across pages, even skipping over all this header information in order to extract these tables of data. Super cool. And frankly, this was enough. Like a few years ago, this was like, I am sold. This completely helps our clients. And this was the totality of the solutions that we were delivering. But we have had some advancements in recent years that has allowed us to not only be able to get great results from printed data, but also be able to get information off of handwritten data. So you all probably have filled out some of those forms in the past that had like a bunch of boxes where you had to put like one letter, you had to write like your name, like I had to write Lisa Hill, L, and then I, and S, and then A, all in the boxes. And that's works in some use cases, but in the kinds of documents we're talking about today, that's just not how the forms are. And that is just not going to happen. But if we go back and look at using Effisoft's new cloud hyperextender technology, I can actually, let's take a look at some of these same document types, but instead of being printed, these same kind of things actually have handwriting information in them. And so we're actually able to get some great results extracting information from the handwriting as well. So really, really great results from sometimes some not even so great handwriting. So if I just kind of flip through some of these, you'll see that we're able to get great results. Now, this one wasn't exactly perfect. That's okay. So maybe an operator would have to go and do some fixing at it, but we have really good results. In fact, if I kind of pop over and view the whole OCR layer on this, you'll see that we have actual information that's being kind of extracted from here, from this document. It's really able to turn that handwriting into those printed characters. So that is really what I wanted to show today. So this is kind of from the operator perspective. I'm going to hand it over to Gary now. He's going to actually take us a little bit through how some of this works kind of behind the scenes. So let me stop sharing. And Gary, you want to take it away?
Yeah, let me share my screen. Let me know when you can see the slide. Whoops, not that slide. There we go. All right. Thanks, Lisa. So she introduced you to some of the concepts of Effisoft Transact from an operator's perspective for reviewing and validating documents. But we really wanted to show you kind of both sides of the equation today. And we're going to move to batch administration and show how we teach Effisoft to recognize and process these documents. So I'm going to walk you through this whole process from the administrator's perspective. And you're going to see today that you don't need to be a developer or write a bunch of code to do these extractions. So before we start, I want to show kind of a high level of this slide here. And this kind of harkens back to what Lisa showed a little bit earlier. This is the whole process of the flow from ingestion to export in Effisoft. But we're really talking about the user experience today, the operator experience and the administrator experience. But I wanted to show this slide first because one, it gives us a big picture view. And two, there's a lot going on and a lot of magic happening behind the scenes. And we don't dig into that deep. It's a 30-minute session today, so we're going to kind of run through a bunch of stuff. But just keep in mind that as we're training Effisoft on these things, that all this is running behind the scenes and going on, intelligent learning. And so
yeah, and I mean, Gary, what I would like to do, I mean, in an effort of time, what you're really seeing on this slide is where we're employing AI and machine learning, right? What you're seeing is in those phases that Lisa was describing, you're seeing that we're utilizing AI and machine learning for not only machine print, but hand print, cursive handwriting, our OCR engine pre-processing. That's where the real strength of the solution is doing the pre-processing for not only deskew and despeckle, but also to make it understand when it comes from this space to the classify stage, right? And then when we get into classify, you have more AI and machine learning being employed, and that's supervised machine learning. So you're in control of what it's learning. So it's not running out of control, so that it can train itself to be better, right? And then when you get to extraction, it's doing the same thing for the extraction categories. And this is really where that table extraction or auto rule builder, right, is that she showed earlier about extracting line items off of tables, right? We're pre-training some of those transactions for invoices or for other different document types. So that's really where the power of this comes into play.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. Yeah, I think today, for me, I'll be focusing on the classification and the extract steps when we're setting up the batch classes. And so let me switch over to the admin screen. And you can see here, I've opened up a batch class. And before we kind of get into this, I should say, like, what is a batch class? What is it for? And basically, it's a collection of document types, one or more. You can have one or as many as you need, and their properties that need to be processed by FSOF. And all the rules associated with that for the classification of the document types and extraction of the data from them. Each document type itself can have its own set of properties as needed. And a batch class also has within it modules, plugins to ingest, classify, assemble, extract, validate, and export data to downstream systems. So before we move into some more of the demo, I want to touch real quick on security. I'm today, Lisa and I both are sort of super admins just for the demo purposes. But obviously you can set roles within FSOF for the admin tools. But it's important to note that on a per batch class basis, you can also set security. And we have a lot of clients that actually integrate with Active Directory and pull in groups via LDAP and then set roles on the batch classes. And this comes into play. We have several clients that actually have multiple departments that utilize FSOF for different reasons. They don't want, they want to silo that data so it can't be seen between departments. So today for demo, we're gonna, I have free reign in the system, but just keep in mind that that is commonly part of an implementation. And I'm gonna work through this as if kind of in the same order that the steps in the flow are. I'm gonna start with the classification and assembly, and then we'll move into the extraction. So for FSOF, there are several different ways to extract or to classify documents. We're gonna talk about search classification today, where you actually train FSOF using sample documents. And the important part of this is you bring in samples of basically first, middle, and last pages if there are more than one page. And FSOF basically learns how to determine, what is the first page of this type? What is the second page or middle page? What is the last page? The first and last pages are important because it's critical to remember that if you have a large PDF full of different documents, FSOF does the separation of those in the assembly. And so you don't need like separator pages or things like that. You're training FSOF to recognize these pages and automatically organize them as they're processed. So I'm going to show real quick. So we have like a correspondence type. If I show the learn files, basically you can see we've just brought in a file for training. And on a document where there's only a one page, and it's pretty common, you will just have a first page. And then we also have, for directional surveys, we have a more complicated set of documents. So we're actually training it to know where these documents typically begin and end. And so FSOF will actually take these samples and generate an index behind the scenes. And when you run your batches through, it'll compare the pages to those document types and determine what it thinks the document is and what type it is. Now, once you've done that, you can start running documents and they should be classified. Now you might be asking, well, how do I know this is going to work, right? Like I've trained the documents, I hit learn files and all these pages are known. I've set up search classification. Do I just start running batches and hope for the best? Well, you don't have to do that. From the admin screen, FSOF provides a test tool for both classification and extraction. And so you can create a batch of sample documents that you want to utilize to determine, hey, what are my scores for classification and what does it think this is? And so, for example, we have a set of documents here, and if I run them through these rules, this is saying, hey, this is a correspondence and it's a first page. And there may be others where it may say, okay, first page, middle page, last page. And so that lets you know basically that your rules are working. And this is important because if you have a reliable set of documents like this, not just for the initial rollout, but if you make changes later, you can do testing on this and determine like, hey, the changes I've made seem to have broken some of my classification. So you can do that kind of regression testing. And you don't have to run batches to do that. You can run with a set of test documents that you utilize. The same feature is available in extraction. I'm not going to run this today because I'm going to show some of the testing within the actual extraction tools. And I want to mention quickly, so I'm really focused on search classification. That is the most common way we actually classify documents. And again, you provide samples. And what makes a good sample document for this is basically a blank form. I just have a quick example here. So like this is a form with no data in it, right? And this is the type of thing we might use for training. Because we're actually comparing it to the content of the form, you don't want a filled out form because that would actually confuse the index a little bit. So we always look for blank source forms. Now, search classification is extremely powerful, but I want to mention a couple of other ways you might classify. There's image classification. There's also key value matching classification, where you can look for strings on a page and say, hey, that means it's page of type 1. And of course, there's barcode processing for both classification and for extraction. And we're not demonstrating barcodes today because they weren't really relevant in the sample set that we had, but it is there and it is possible to use. So now where are we? We've gotten through providing samples to each of these document types. First and last pages were appropriate. We've tested it. It looks great, and we're done, right? Well, not really, right? Because we're not extracting anything yet. So let's talk a little bit about extraction. So there are several tools for extraction, just like there are for classification. The ones I'm going to highlight today are probably the ones that we use the most internally with our deployments. So if you open up a document type here and we have index fields, these are different fields that we're actually, we're trying to set data into county and the date and lat long and well name. And so if I open up one of these, there are a set of rules here. How do I want to set this data? It's important for me to mention at the top, like you can actually just do generic regular expression pattern matching in the whole document if you want to. That's not something we normally do just because it's not as exact as something like key value extraction. Now, to us, the beauty of key value extraction is that actually you can use an anchor target to find a key and then a related value. And it becomes more precise way to find this information. So I click on well named here. Let me open it up an example. And you can see we have a key and a value here. So I'm going to open up an example. And so we have a directional survey sample, and as an administrator, you just load your example in, point it at where the location of the key value is, and then where in relation to that does the value live. And these are set to a size that's great for demoing because we're trying to be exact in that, but you can expand this as needed a little bit if there was some variation in the form. The important thing to remember is this uses pattern matching through regular expressions through both the key and the value. And so that's set over here. Now, you might come back and say, well, I don't know anything about regular expressions. This turns out to be harder than I thought. FSoft thought of that a little bit. There is like a whole builder tool and a pool tool that you can utilize, a bunch of things that are available out of the box to help you get started on that. So you don't have to kind of think of these on a scratch basis. But as you're setting it up, you can also specify, hey, I don't want to look anywhere beyond the first page, or I only want to look at the last page, or I want to look across all pages. And so you can be very specific about where this type of data lives when you're looking for it. And as you saw before I clicked into this, you can actually set more than one rule on the field if needed, if there are variations, and you can actually set weightings on those as well to say, hey, this is the most important rule. These are secondary, I'm going to lower weight them. And that impacts the confidence levels of extraction.
I just want to interject, and I want to say, I think that's really important to note because these are not forms that every single one looks the same, right? Like we need flexible rules. Again, back to that example of just how you teach that person in your office, like what is the information you're looking for on here? That's the kind of thing that Gary's configuring here, right? So flexible rules that are really exactly the same way you would teach that human being is the way we're teaching the system.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, that's and there's so much you can do in here, and again, we're a 30-minute session, so we're trying to run through it. But I want to show one important part of this is as you're developing this, you don't have to wait and see, does this work or doesn't work? I don't know. You don't have to run stuff through. You can actually test this on the fly with the test tool, and it'll come back and tell you, I found this key and I found this value, and I'm super confident that this is right. And so you can actually evaluate your extractions as you're working on them. And that's really powerful and makes life a million times easier. It just, as you're setting up rules, it's a very flexible tool. I'm going to show a couple more of these. In the interest of time, I'm going to move to the next extraction methodology, which is paragraph extraction. That is a kind of a neat idea, basically. Like, you may have stuff like emails or cover pages or things like that, where there's data you want to pull out of it, but it's in like a paragraph. And so how do we do that? Well, it's somewhat similar to key value extraction, except we're actually telling it, here's a start and an end point of a paragraph text, and within that, look for these values. So let me open up one of those real quick. And this is going to look very similar to what you saw before, except I'm saying the value is somewhere in here, and look here and here, and then that should match this pattern. Now, this is a demo, so we can be super specific about our pattern. It's going to look great, but you get the idea. Like, we can use regular expression pattern matching to extract data out of here. And let's test it out, right? Does it actually work? So here we go. We've pulled this value and it's 100% confident. We can see where it's extracting from. And so we did a couple of those for the demo. This is well named, and I think also API has a good example. Let me show that one real quick. So this is another one where we're trying to pull the API value, and we can use, because if this is well formed, we can say, oh, it's going to be preceded by this API string, but let's run through the test on this one. So you can see, again, it pulled the data and we're 100% confident. So all of these, when you're setting up these extraction rules, there's a tester available to you. Now, we don't touch on cross-section extraction today. I want to mention it. I've used it in some cases. It's much like key value, except it's an X and Y component. You have a key that's a row and a key that's a column, and in the intersection of those is your value. And so if you need that precision, this is a really great tool. I want to then move to table extraction because it's sort of magical. It's pretty amazing. I think you saw it with Lisa's demo. Like, wow, you can pull pages and pages of data. And the way they've allowed this to be set up is pretty cool. You can choose sort of what tools you want for extraction. And we typically use column header and regular expression extractions. Coordinate extractions are useful if you're very consistent in your location. Our documents we typically deal with aren't. And so we tend to look at pattern matching for, like, hey, where does this header look like? What's the pattern for that? And then what does the data within the columns look like? So let me open this up and edit it. And so this looks similar to what probably Lisa showed in the operator demo, but this is sort of the setup screen. And it looks a little intimidating at first. There's a lot of data in here, but it actually is pretty straightforward. We're using the column header and regular expression of the actual data here. If I click through the different column headers, you can see the rules are slightly different for the extraction. And again, this looks kind of complicated, but it makes sense. It's logical. It's very powerful. And just like all the other extraction tools, you can test it. And so if I run the tester, you can see, like, oh, great, this is doing exactly what I want it to do. It's pulling the data that I need. So before ever actually having to run a batch instance through the system, you can evaluate whether your rules are working. So that is all about extraction, and that's key value extraction, paragraph extraction, and table extraction. I want to touch on a couple more things real quick. One, the first is validation. We do get confidence levels on extractions, but it's possible there's a high confidence, level extraction that basically was incorrect. And so for fields where you need precision and you want to make sure the data is extracted correctly, you can set up validation rules. And so you can use, again, regular expression patterns to determine whether the extracted data matches the expected pattern. And so it's really powerful. And these will get flagged red. I think when Lisa was showing the operator view, there are, flagged fields that need attention from a human reviewer. And if you mouse over in the operator screen, you'll see that it failed validation and it needs a review. So this is a very powerful tool, and we use it quite extensively. The last thing I want to show is the date field. And Lisa touched on this in her part of the demo. So dates are crazy, right? We get dates in all sorts of formats and they're not consistent and they make us go mad when we're trying to export this into a database. It's like, I only want dates in this format. Well, format conversion is hugely powerful, especially for date conversion. We use it a lot for that. There are other tools for replacement that we can use, but you can see here, we've covered a lot of the bases on all possible date formats, right? But they all get normalized. And so if your downstream system expects the date in a certain format, we can cover that, right? It's going to put everything in a consistent format post extraction and rewrite it into a format that your external systems can understand. We do use this a lot because, as I said, dates seem to never be consistent, and so we want to make sure that the systems are getting the data they expect when we pass it out of FSOF. So that was an extremely quick tour. I know we're a little short on time, but I hope that's helpful to show you that all that really is the beginning to end of setting up this batch class, and this is a real working batch class that we pass these documents through. So we've gone through that process, and I kind of want to give some final thoughts just on some tips and ideas, and just to kind of recap. Good for training, for search classification, good sample documents are really important, and that typically means like blank forms if you can get them, or blank out the data, because those are the targets for the search classification. Also remember, we just scratched the surface on the plugins, right, for classification and extraction. There are a lot of tools. We could spend a whole webinar just on extraction tools, and the right tool depends on your use case. So there's a lot of flexibility there. The ICR handwriting recognition that Lisa showed in her part of the demo with the Cloud Hyperextender, it's a huge leap forward in handwriting recognition. I've been super impressed with that. Like, I really am excited by the power of that tool and the quality of the extractions that we get. It's just really awesome. It's almost like a kind of a game for us now to send it samples and see if it can extract it, because it's been so effective. So we're really excited about that feature. Remember, on your extractions, validation rules are important to ensure that the data is the format you expected and they get flagged for review if they're not. And again, I showed you format conversions, very, very powerful for normalizing data so that when you export it, your downstream systems get it in a format that it's expected. And lastly, remember, especially, you may start with a deployment with like one use case, maybe one department, but you maybe want to roll on other departments. Maybe you have HR and you want to roll in finance and so on and so forth. Be thinking about how you'd want your Active Directory groups or your other LDAP groups to be set up to make that easy. And as you add new batch classes, you can set security on those batch classes so that data is siloed and it's easy to roll out new use cases. And I think that's really it for our tips. I hope that was helpful today.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I did want to add, like Gary talked about different validation. One of the coolest validation things that I think that we had done is we had a client who was extracting all that directional survey info. And we actually had validation against the TBD. So we actually did the calculation of the math using like the azimuth and the inclination, and calculated what the TBD should be and compared that against each of the values actually extracted from the form. So we were able to cross-reference and really check to see if we had gotten all of our results correct, because if that math didn't work, then we knew something was off. And they needed really high confidence results for each of those rows. And so that was another way for us to add some automation there to give us that confidence in the results. So as I mentioned, this is really, and I know we're running over, so just have a couple more minutes. So this is really just one step in a bigger process of automation. Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about how you're seeing kind of FSOF fit into that kind of overall journey? And I think I can share my screen maybe again. I think we have a slide there. Gary, I thought you were going to show it, so I have lost it. You want to show that slide for?
Yeah.
Dan?
Yeah, so while they're pulling that up, I mean, I don't know how many of you are experiencing this, but hyper automation is this new buzzword that's coming out, right? And what that is just kind of a conglomerate of all of the things that happen within your business, whether those are interactions between systems, or they're people interacting with a system or a robot working with a system. What we're really focused on here is an open system and feeding that system with the information that it needs, right? In systems that are in place, if they don't have metadata or information, they're kind of useless. It's a brick, right, sitting on your desk. What Effisoft is doing is we're acting as the hub in the center of a wheel, right? And we're utilizing all of these integration utilities or other utilities, and we're integrating via APIs, right? So Workato, they're really an application development company where they're making integrations to your ERP systems, back-end systems, things of that nature. MuleSoft is an iPaaS solution. They're kind of doing the same thing, but it's really on the infrastructure side, right? And then the ones you see up here that you probably notice, that you probably know, Blue Prism, UiPath, Automation Anywhere, those are RPA vendors. And then you have people that are analytics vendors like Alteryx, Catalytic, and the like. So what we're really doing is we're serving up the information that's caught on a piece of paper to all these subsystems that you may be using already to automate your business processes, right? So this is the beginning and the slice off the top, right? To start that whole journey. I was just at a conference and everybody was talking about this. Literally everybody. So I know that it's happening. We all know it's happening. We're adapting. And the thing around here is innovation. We're constantly innovating the product. Gary mentioned our handwriting. If you've been in this industry long enough or have been trying to extract handwriting, it was in single digits, maybe 10%, maybe. And now we're well above that, right? And that was being generous. That's why you heard Gary snicker in the background. Right, because
no, it's amazing. It's like a magic trick now.
Right. So I mean, those are the kinds of innovations we're making, and what by using some of these tools, this is just a small little snippet of what we're working on. It's helping us to do those things and make things better for you. So I just wanted to mention that because I know that there may be people that are looking into these things.
Cool. Yeah. All right, we had originally wanted to be able to answer some questions, but in the interest of time, since we've gone so far over, Gary, can you pop down to your slide 6? We would, if there are any questions, we would love to follow up with you and answer those. You can see all of our contact info here. Feel free to reach out to any of us, all of us, and we will definitely get your questions answered. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully we didn't make you too late for your next thing, and have a great afternoon.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.